we're not on. Yeah, we do. Is it on? Testing 1, 2. It is on. No, it's on. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Jennifer Storm. I am the victim advocate of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's my honor and privilege to stand here today with representatives from both the House and the Senate. We have Representative Verb, who is the architect of the bill that we're going to be discussing today, Senator Rafferty, Representative Turzai. We have several members from the District Attorneys Association as well as elected district attorneys. We have representation from the Fraternal Order of Police, the Pennsylvania State Police, former U.S. Marshals, as well as the governor himself. I want to thank Representative Verb and all of the House and Senate leaders who are here today, who I worked with to help make this bill a reality. I'm calling upon every lawmaker in this building to please swiftly pass this legislation so that we may offer a new, unique, and necessary tool for crime victims in the Commonwealth. I cannot tell you how many times I have had to tell a victim that you have no rights. When a victim calls with a circumstance that would fit this bill, that I have to say, I'm sorry, but your rapist, the murderer of your loved one, the man who beat you half to death, or the woman who stole your fortune has more rights than you. The re-victimization relief in the Crime Victims Act amendment that we are seeking will give us the ability in these horrific cases to say, you have a voice, you have a right. You can seek relief from this harmful and traumatizing behavior. The Office of the Victim Advocate is appalled and disgusted that a college would give any credence to the voice of a convicted cop killer. Rather than spending his time productively behind bars serving his justified sentence, he continuously finds ways to re-victimize the Faulkner family by spewing his victim-blaming rhetoric. A commencement speaker is to uplift, to motivate, to inspire the young minds to do great things. A premeditated murder of a police officer does none of that. It is shameful, it's disgraceful that this event took place yesterday, and it's the precipice for why we are here today. I have the privilege to read a statement on behalf of Maureen Faulkner, whose husband, Daniel Faulkner, was gunned down by the convicted murderer who was able to give a commencement speech yesterday, and I'm going to read her statement now. Why should the voice of a man be heard when the man has violently and wantonly taken the voice of another innocent man by murdering him in cold blood? To most of us, the answer is simply, logically, and morally, yet nobody has been able to provide me with a satisfactory answer to this question for a very long time. 33 years ago, my husband, Officer Daniel Faulkner, was silenced by Mumia Abu-Jamal when he pulled the trigger and fired a fatal bullet into Danny's head from less than 6 inches away. Since that time, my husband's killer has had a lot to say about nearly every topic, with exception to one: what happened the night he murdered my husband. Mumia's conviction for violently murdering a wounded and unarmed law enforcement officer has stood the test of innumerable appeals that have been reviewed by dozens of judges over several decades. Yet despite his violent act, his voice has always been heard in one form or another, either in books, countless live and recorded interviews, on the radio, in supportive documentaries, and most recently as an honored commencement speaker at a tiny college in Vermont. Time after time, decade after decade, my family and I have been forced to endure the emotionally painful and degrading avalanche of public speaking done by the remorseless killer who snuffed out the promising life of our beloved Danny. The time has come to put an end to the desecration of our free speech laws by Mumia and anyone else in the Pennsylvania state system who has violently taken the life of another. I am putting my full support and energy and resources behind the Pennsylvania Office of the Victim Advocate and their efforts to pass Section 1304 of the Crime Victims Act, and I personally urge every citizen, public official, and law enforcement officer to join me in this effort until the ridiculous and overly generous guidelines of our free speech laws for incarcerated persons are changed. Together we will bring sanity and reason back to this despicable problem, and that is signed by Maureen Faulkner. She wanted to be here today, but she is in New York dealing with national media. Unfortunately, her scars have been ripped open once again as she's dealing with this. I'm so grateful to work in a state that truly understands the importance of protecting crime victims and giving them the resources that they need against injustices such as this. I'm also proud to say that that leadership goes all the way to the top, to the office of the governor. We in Pennsylvania have a governor who has built his career on protecting crime victims. From his work as a district attorney to his innovative programs that he developed as the Attorney General, and at his time here as governor of this great Commonwealth, where we have passed numerous laws ensuring and expanding the protection of crime victims. It is my privilege today to introduce to you your Governor, Tom Corbett.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you very much. And let me start off this. Nobody can say anything better than the way it was just described in Maureen Faulkner's own letter. That should be, and I'm sure you can provide a copy to everybody in the media. As you know, I've been working with law enforcement almost my entire career, supporting all of law enforcement as we move along in the last 30-some years. Through all the different issues, one of the hardest things that it is for a prosecutor or for a law enforcement officer is to go to the funeral of a law enforcement officer. We recently had to do it today in an accident, but more importantly, a few weeks ago. And we now look for that killer up in the Poconos. So it seems it's very appropriate that we be talking about something like this today. In past years, institutions of higher education did not turn to unrepentant criminals to address and to advise their graduates. Today, a small college with a graduating class of 23 is stealing the public attention by selecting a cop killer to promote himself. Goddard College and Mumia Abu-Jamal truly are re-victimizing the entire Faulkner family, the entire family. 33 years ago, Abu-Jamal shot Danny Faulkner as a Philadelphia officer laid on the ground from a previous wound from him. He carried out this murder with a gun registered in his own name. He did it in front of witnesses and told police at the hospital that he hoped that Faulkner would die. Those are the facts. The vast majority of the people in Philadelphia, the vast majority of the people in Pennsylvania, in this country, don't dispute them. To me, to Philadelphians, Abu-Jamal is a convicted murderer who has conned naive individuals from Hollywood to Paris into believing that he is somehow a political prisoner for shooting a police officer in the head. That's why I have no hesitancy in endorsing a change in our Crime Victims Act that provides for injunctive relief on behalf of victims of violent crime. This injunction could prevent convicted violent felons from every day re-victimizing families and other injured parties by using public venues to promote themselves and their own agenda, truly at the emotional expense of the victims and of the public. We are not questioning the college's constitutional right to choose their own speaker. I am questioning their taste. We are questioning their common decency in the speaker that they have chosen. And while law-abiding citizens are entitled to an array of rights, from free travel to free speech, convicted felons in prison because they abused and surrendered their rights. And nobody has a right to continually taunt the victims of their violent crimes in the public square. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Corbett, for those remarks. Now I'd like to introduce the architect of this bill. Representative Mike Verb has been truly a friend to the victim services community. When there's an issue, he finds a way to solve it, and he does so with a swiftness that I have yet to see. It is my great privilege to introduce him to you today.
I just want to start off by thanking everyone that came on such short notice to be here today, including 4 busloads of cadets from the Philadelphia Police Academy who went to the trooper's funeral this morning for them to come here and see in full life, not just a funeral, but then to see what the legislature is doing to one step further enhance our protections for our victims. We've heard so much about Officer Faulkner, and certainly that has been the event that occurred to bring us all here today. But we're no strangers in this session to protecting our crime victims. The time has come that we open the eyes of Pennsylvania, and frankly this country, and show that we care just as much, if not more, for the rights of our victims. 33 years later, when will the healing begin? This legislation is very simple. This gives standing to the Attorney General, to the District Attorney, or to the family, the victim's representative, to seek civil action in court and ask a judge to review the facts of what's being presented, what was going on. So if this were in law this week, the family or Attorney General or District Attorney could have gone to a court and asked the court to review the exaggeration of the First Amendment rights that Jamal has. There's nowhere in the Constitution that says we should be setting up TV production studios in our prisons. And essentially that's what we are doing. A 25-minute phone call. After spending all these years in jail, I'm not sure what more speech a person needs. So this is quite simple. I am so honored. All of my colleagues from the House and Senate are here, the governor, our victim advocate, the District Attorney of Philadelphia, other district attorneys from the Harrisburgh area. But we're going to get this done. We're going to send it to the governor and let it take the path where it may. We hope to never use this law. We hope that actual people that sit in prison recognize that they themselves are there to heal, not tear the scabs off the wounds of our victims some 30 years later. And we as a legislature plan on changing that, understanding that of course the criminals have rights. We've heard about them for dozens of years. But we need to make sure that our victims are going to have those same rights, just as we've done in other legislation. And we need to recognize that we're going to stand up for them and give them that equal voice all through the criminal justice process. The prosecution and the defense has equal input all along. Well, for some reason, when they go behind a taxpayer-paid prison and do their taxpayer-paid college degrees and do their taxpayer-paid rants that Jamal is doing, we need to understand, we need to come to belief that it is now time that the voice of the victims be louder than the cowards would sit behind concrete and steel. Thank you.
While we certainly understand and respect that this issue kind of was spawned based on this commencement speech, we understand and realize that crime victims experience this each and every day. Just weeks ago, I had a victim calling into my office and her civil attorney calling into my office asking me what I can do to help because an inmate was giving interviews to a would-be journalist who was then posting this information on a blog. They were posting the names and addresses and emails of sex assault victims, and there was nothing I could do. This bill would have given that civil attorney and that victim the right to file an injunctive relief. This is what we need. It is my great privilege now to introduce to you Patty Tedesco, who has been dealing with this for 51 years of her life after her brother, a police officer in New Jersey, was gunned down. She's here to share her experience with you today.
Thank you. On August 26, 1963, where some of you may not have even been born yet, my brother, who's a probationary patrolman on the police force for 5 days, he didn't get his uniform until he was buried. He and another seasoned detective were gunned down in a bar after checking a disturbance. Thomas Trantino is a well-known celebrity murderer these days. He has written a book. He was a speaker at Rutgers University. My mom, at 90 years old, was in a wheelchair going to Bergen County to fight him from doing a movie and benefiting from the proceeds of that movie. I will tell you, I was 11 years old. I have lived this my entire life. My father died shortly after. He cried every night until he got a massive coronary. My mother, I would pick up from her bed every night and bring from his bed and bring her back to her own room. My family never, ever recovered from this murder. And we are totally always re-victimized. That's why I love this bill. It's time. It's more than time to help us. They say the criminals have rights. As far as I'm concerned, what I've seen in 51 years, the criminals have all the rights. And we have none, except to try how to live our lives. When I called Rutgers University and I said, I'm a professional speaker and I'm a victim, and you know the case, everybody knows the Trantino case. I would like to come in. You're going to have him speak? I would like to speak as part of the victims. They said, we're not interested in speaking to you. You see, they're interested in celebritizing the murderers. And that's what we've done. That's what we need to stop and give our families a break. I will tell you, I always wonder what I'd really have been like if I didn't live this. We never celebrated holidays anymore. It has even rolled down to my daughter, who's 25 years old. My book will be out soon on living this my whole life. But it's not about that. It's about doing something. We didn't have victim advocates in 1963. I'm very proud to be part of Pennsylvania now. I've lived here for 21 years. I do whatever I can for the victims associations. Thank God for all of these people who help people like me, families like me. The Voto family, the other detective, they're all dead now. This man killed everybody off. There's only about 2 of us left. And so I really hope this bill is supported, and anything I can ever do to help any family from a homicide, I'd be happy to be there to help. Thank you for this time. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Patty, for putting a face to this horrific issue. I want to now introduce to you District Attorney Seth Williams, who unfortunately on his watch has seen the unnecessary gunning down and horrific violent acts against law enforcement officers in Philadelphia, and he's here to share his experience.
All right, good afternoon. I would like to first again just thank Ms. Tedesco for sharing her very personal story of her family's tragedy with all of us. But again, it brings home the reason why all of us are here today. I'm very pleased to join all of you today as we rally for passage of House Bill 2533. I'd like to thank Governor Corbett, Representative Vereb, Majority Leader Turzai, and our victim advocate, Ms. Storm, for your leadership and enthusiasm in standing up for our victims. I'd like to thank my very good friend John McNesby and the FOP Lodge 5 for your unending support for Maureen Faulkner and for being here with all of us today. This legislation is very simple. It allows victims or prosecutors on behalf of a victim to stop their offenders from re-victimizing them. This is the least we can do for our victims. As District Attorney of Philadelphia and as a former Assistant District Attorney in Philadelphia, I want to tell you that Maureen Faulkner is part of our family in the District Attorney's office. No one deserves what she has gone through these past 33 years and continues to go through. Recently, I worked with Senators Toomey and Casey and the FOP to successfully stop the nomination of a gentleman who volunteered his organization to work on behalf of Mumia Abu-Jamal's appeal to head the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. And if that was not enough, now Goddard College invited an unapologetic cop killer to speak at his graduation. What an insult. And more than that, what a hurtful thing to do to Maureen Faulkner. Do the students want to hear from Maureen? Do they care what she continues to go through? Do they consider the effect that the invitation would have on her? So if this bipartisan legislation by my friend Representative Vereb is enacted, it will make very clear that we will not forget about our victims. It ensures a process by which a victim or a prosecutor can seek a civil order to stop conduct which perpetuates the continuing effect on the crime on the victim. So on behalf of my colleagues in the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for standing up. Thank you for not forgetting about our victims.
Thank you very much, D.A. Williams. I would now like to ask Senator Rafferty to come up and give a few remarks as well. Senator Rafferty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well done, Michael. And I'm assuring you and Majority Leader Turzai that when the bill comes over to the Senate of Pennsylvania, that Senator Dominic Pileggi, the Majority Floor Leader, Senator Joe Scarnati, our pro tem, and myself will make sure that this bill gets through the Senate, quick passage, into the governor for his signature. By this legislation passing and getting to the governor and signed into law, the scales of justice that we see outside of our courthouses will begin to tilt back for an even keel. Because for all too long, in my humble opinion, the victims have not been part of the process. But with some of the dynamic DAs that we have behind me here today, and with this piece of legislation, the victims will play an integral part in the judicial process. They are part of that scale, and now that scale will tilt back in favor of the victims themselves. This has been a terrible wound on the Southeast, the city of Philadelphia, and the Faulkner family, and her extended family, the Philadelphia Police Department. Every time somebody chooses for entertainment value to pull a cold-hearted killer in for speech making upsets me and all the civilized people of the Southeast. I'm very familiar with freedom of speech, but this is strictly for entertainment value. What we need to do is respect those people that have had to suffer at his hands and criminals' hands, the victims, and all the areas that have had to put up with this. Every time we think the wound begins to heal, somebody comes along and reopens it. And I challenge those 23 graduates to get in touch with John McNesby, with Seth Williams, with Commissioner Ramsey, and travel around the city of Philadelphia with a Philadelphia police officer for a night. Or to sit down for 2 hours with Maureen Faulkner, and then see if you made a wise decision in picking a cold-hearted, cold-blooded killer. So I stand with my colleague and friend, Representative Mike Verb, Majority Leader Turzai, the members of the House, and on behalf of the Republican caucus, and I know many of the Democrats in the Senate of Pennsylvania feel the same way, we will stand and push this legislation forward and get it to the governor so those scales of justice begin to balance once again and take the victims into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we take questions and conclude the press conference, I just want to ask everyone to do one thing. Oftentimes we have to take a moment of silence when someone has been passed. Oftentimes the victims' voices are silenced, which is why we're here. What this bill does is it takes that silence away and gives them a voice. So instead of taking a moment of silence, what I would like you to do is put your hands together and make as much noise as you can for the officers that are here, for the officers that couldn't be here because they were gunned down, and for the victims who will finally have a voice because of these brave men and women who are standing behind me who drafted this legislation. So make some noise because they're here. That does conclude the formal press conference today. However, we will be available for questions, and I believe Representative Verb would like to make some final closing remarks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just one thing I forgot. Staring down at the tile in front of this podium, John McNesby, your leadership on the issue, your leadership for all of the Philadelphia police. Our state lodge is represented here as well. Thank you. Last night, you've given me a privilege that I've never had, and that was to be part of the silence at 13th and Locust while this crumb was delivering his speech to those 23 unfortunate children. And to stand there for 1.5 hour in silence and silence that intersection that probably has not been silenced since 1981. What a great time of reflection. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for getting the busload of cadets up here. Chief Boyle, there you go. We're going to take questions if there are any. No questions? All right, thank you very much.